I'm buyer of. I don't want my money back, Jonah, even though Steven's mad at me. Welcome.
Good to be here, Hugh.
What did you make of Stephen Hayes's assessment of me?
I think you and Steve should have it out on your own. I really did not like your column, and but I wouldn't have done the Twitter thread. But I think if you want to have, I'm not here to adjudicate a spat between the two of you. You guys can do it on your own.
No, I not looking for that. Just wondering if you agreed with him concerning the allegation as to my veracity in the control of Salem of its host, which is not true. Do you believe that?
I actually, Hugh, I'll be honest with you. I don't know.
Okay,
I
it's not
honestly
true.
don't know. I can.
It's not
Okay.
true. It's just not true. And I've told Steve, but let's put that aside. I want to talk to you about impeachment tomorrow. I do not believe you to be suffering from TDS or Steve. I hadn't read the editorial he referred to in his Twitter thread in which we engaged in some lively debate. But I do wonder what you think about impeachment tomorrow because I think it's a terrible, terrible precedent. What do you think, Jonah?
I think it's a necessary and important precedent. I think that what the President of the United States did was try to steal an election through a coordinated, well-planned series of lies and distortions and conspiracy theories that began before even the election was conducted. He laid down the predicates for it. And then from election night forward, he lied to the American people. He encouraged others to lie that the election was stolen, that there was massive systemic fraud. And he tried to exhaust all the possibilities, all the avenues to steal the election with that campaign of lies. And when then that didn't work, his final gambit, after an outrageously offensive lawsuit from Texas, his final gambit was to send a crowd to swarm around the first branch of government, the supreme branch of government, to try to intimidate Congress and his own vice president to do something manifestly unconstitutional in order to steal the election. Now, I don't think he planned the violence, but a bank robber who doesn't plan on hurting anybody and then ends up, people get hurt, that makes things worse. This was foreseeable. It was the political equivalent of negligent homicide of what he did. And the idea that we can let that stand without some important sanction on it, including barring him from ever running for office again, I think is a really bad idea.
Now, I think you're very reasonable, Jonah, so I'm going to try and persuade you against that. But I want you to know the predicate. Governor Christie and I agree. He faces civil liability from the family of the officer who died as a consequence of the argument you just made. I do not know that a jury will find him guilty of negligence and recklessness, but there will be an argument that wrongful death is his responsibility by virtue of the argument you've laid out. However, impeachment is different from causation of harm. Impeachment is a constitutional process that I believe most certainly involves the House collecting evidence, and I've done just a little bit of it on the air of people who were there, who were neither incited by his speech nor did they detect in his speech any incitement to violence, and at a minimum, a Senate trial that becomes unconstitutional the moment he leaves office, as the plain reading of the document and precedent is described in the 1974 OLC opinion dictate. So even though it would be appropriate inquiry were he not leaving office, it is not constitutional, and a snap impeachment, as law professor Turley argues, as I believe Judge Ludig will argue later today, and as I have been arguing, is very bad for the future. Is that persuasive to you at all?
Not really. First of all, there has been an impeachment that was conducted after someone left office. You know, what was it, the Belknap in 1870s?
Can I correct you for a second? The Belknap was
Yeah.
dropped in large part because the Senate concluded afterwards that they lacked jurisdiction upon his resignation. So it began,
Yeah,
but they dropped
But that
it.
was right. My only point is that one did incur after the person left office, and then the senators during the conviction phase were free to make that determination. I think, I don't put much credence. Jonathan Turley's been making some very bad arguments lately about saying that president is protected by First Amendment stuff and all that. I think what he did, and I tried to say this in the initial part, but Again, I don't think he intended for there to be violence. I think he was grotesquely cavalier about the possibility, given how many warnings and indications there were that there could and would be violence. That so he was at the very least incompetent in how he anticipated all of this. But even if the protesters had simply peacefully marched around, as the organizers, that was their intent. Ali Alexander is quoted as saying that the plan was to intimidate Congress and the vice president with a mob, his words, not mine, and make them feel scared to go against them. This was, as I was saying, the last-ditch effort. I think his lies, and they were absolute lies that could never withstand scrutiny in, 60 court hearings, his absolute lies, manufactured lies, which he repeated on the day of this riot about the election being stolen, telling people who sincerely believe that the country was being stolen by a communist dupe, is a way to encourage people to commit violence. But even if they hadn't committed violence, his campaign from the beginning to steal an election that he lost legitimately, to me, is alone impeachable. And a lot of the conservatives out there who say, well, Hillary Clinton questioned the election's legitimacy and all that kind of stuff. That's true. But Hillary Clinton's sour grapes were an end to themselves. She called and conceded the night of the election. Donald Trump's questioning of the legitimacy of this election was a means to an end, which was to stay in power. And that has to be punished as a historical matter. Now, if you think that the impeachment is unconstitutional, I salute you. That's a perfectly legitimate argument to make. If you say just impeachment can't be done, or even if you think it's a bad precedent, which I disagree with. But if Republicans were sincere about saying, hey, look, for prudential reasons, for precedential reasons, we don't think we should do a snap impeachment. So instead, we are going to censure the president and condemn him, and all went on record and voted on doing that, I would have some respect for them. But a lot of these House guys, a lot of them, basically want to say that the real scandal here is that Joe Biden isn't pursuing unity, as if they gave a rat's ass about unity when Donald Trump was president. And they don't want to talk about the fact that they were complicit in giving permission structure to millions of Americans to believe the lie that the election was stolen.
Okay, so let me unpack a few things. I heard you concede it was not his intent to cause the violence, which is to me of supreme importance. I have agreed with you from the beginning that the election was over the day after the election, and the president-elect has been the president-elect since then. And I so advised the president. I so advised in every column. I'm just suggesting, Jonah, that everyone who is getting impassioned about this separate their condemnation of the conduct from what is the constitutional remedy, for the reason that Ben Sass said on this show on Thursday. Prudence may well dictate that you do not go forward with an impeachment, even if you had the time to get it done. But in my view, it is quite obviously, it cannot have anything to do with due process, because there are answers to all of your arguments, but they require the collection of evidence. And in the United States, the rule of law requires due process even for a president you loathe, with what you describe as a conduct record as obviously terrible as you describe. So
let me offer you a counter
please.
Hypothetical here. Andy McCarthy makes this point. What if we found out, and again, there's no proof of anything like this, but let's just found out that Russia, that Donald Trump was in fact a Russian agent, and he let it slip, and it was manifestly true, and it became immensely clear that he could not be in the White House a minute longer. You really think that you would need to do a trial, or let's say he actually fulfilled the prophecy and shot people on Fifth Avenue? You really think that you would need to do the full Senate trial, take weeks and months collecting evidence before you could impeach him? I don't think
Not weeks
so.
and months. No, I think an impeachment, some trial. Yeah, I sat on a jury on a third strike case. A judge let me on it, and it took us 2 weeks to reach a hung jury verdict because one person simply refused to accept the evidence. And it was the most open and shut thing I've ever seen. Fingerprint evidence, but the foundation wasn't laid. I don't think it's hard to do an impeachment in the House in 10 days, and I don't think it's impossible to do an impeachment trial in the Senate in 20 days. But I don't think it's possible right now. And what we're dealing with is right now, because I do foresee in the future where snap impeachments might become kind of a routine, like Roman Revolution, the iteration
We've
of
never
success.
removed a single president through impeachment, so I'm less worried about that. Look, Thoreau once said that some circumstantial evidence is very compelling, as when you find a trout in the milk. When you have a mob incited by the President of the United States that is beating police officers with American flags so they can get inside to hang Mike Pence, which is something they chanted, and when you have the President of the United States tweeting well after a lot of these facts were known, that this is what you get when you steal an election, I'm not sure how much more evidence gathering we have to do.
So, Jonah, therefore, the rule would be that in any case where a mob violence followed a speech by a president, an impeachment would be automatically justified?
Not in any case. In this case, because I think the publicly known facts are pretty well known and established. I agree entirely that lots of politicians say be strong and fight and all of that kind of stuff. I agree entirely that Democrats did all sorts of outrageous things, encouraging BLM protesters. But again, you keep wanting to talk about the violence as if that is the threshold question. If the crowd were peaceful, what Donald Trump has done here by trying to intimidate the superior branch of government with a mob to get them to commit an anti-constitutional act, what he wanted Mike Pence to do was unconstitutional. Do you agree with that?
Yes. Yes,
okay,
I do.
So he's trying to use a crowd. Let's say it was peaceful. He's trying to use a crowd to intimidate Mike Pence in Congress to commit an unconstitutional act. That is itself a violation of the president's oath, and he needs to be sanctioned for it. If you say we can't do impeachment, well, okay, let's have Republicans come forward and give us the next best option. Because right now their next best option is to bitch and moan about how Joe Biden isn't living up to his pledge for unity.
Did you happen to read my
Republicans are being smeared by being associated with something that the president really hasn't shown any contrition for?
Jonah, in the dissent that Justice Jackson wrote for Korematsu, he said this majority opinion is a loaded weapon left lying around, the precedent of it, that you take extreme action because of the extreme threat. It was only repudiated recently. It was a loaded weapon left lying around. The conduct of our Article 1 bodies in the aftermath of this outrageous incident is a loaded weapon left lying around. I do not understand why we cannot leave it to politics, which is where these debates ought to have, because there are obviously millions of people who disagree with your assessment of what he did. I don't, in terms of what he asked Pence to do. But that's a political argument that should be had, not a conclusory performance that ought to be conducted.
Yeah, but impeachment, as I think we both agree, is a political act. It is not a criminal trial. It is a political act.
We do agree.
Institutions of government
We do agree.
offer serious verdicts about serious misconduct.
We do agree. But it does not have the time to be conducted therein. It's impossible to get done. Jonah, I want to give you the last word.
Okay. Thank you, Hugh. I mean, look, I have no problem with the prudential argument saying we don't have enough time. I'd like to hear a lot more Republicans to remove, for the purpose of civic hygiene, say he should be impeached, but we don't have time. I'm not hearing a lot of that.
All right, Jonah Goldberg.